Good morning, YouTubers and subscribers. I'm up to 15 now. I'm really pushing for 25. Anyways, I'm on my way back to the States from the island of Cyprus. But there's going to be a slight detour that you may find interesting, but was a key part of my life. So stand by and we'll be back in a second. Okay, like I said, I'm on my way back from the island of Cyprus. I think I flew TWA this time. It's my first and only time that I can remember flying TWA. And I flew into Idlewild in New York City, got off the plane with a plan. First of all, I had just re-enlisted in the United States Navy for 6 years. I received a $2,000 re-enlistment bonus, which was burning a hole in my pocket. I was still in civilian clothes, but I was coming home for Christmas. This is December of 1963. I got off the plane and I said, what am I going to do? I said, well, I'll grab a cab down to the bus stop, grab the bus to take me up to Albany, New York. And then from Albany, New York, or Schenectady, New York, I'll get off there. It's only a short ride home, so I could call my mother or somebody to come and get me. So I got my taxi cab and we started driving down from Idlewild into the New York City. And I kept saying, God, I really don't want to wait at a bus stop. And he said, where are you going? And I said, exit 28 on the New York State Thruway. I said, what would it cost for me to drive up there? Well, basically, he's going to turn the meter off, and he said, I do it for $125. He says, just say, let's go, Joe, and we're on our way. And so I said, let's go, Joe, and on the way. So he drove me from New York City all the way up to exit 28 on the New York State Thruway. Well, just before that, he didn't get me to the exit. Just before that is the Pattersonville restaurant, or one of those throughway restaurants. I used to work there, and my mother also worked there. So I figured he could let me off there. I could wait a while for her to get off of work and jump in her car, and she'd just drive me on home. So I paid him off. He's a happy camper. He said, how do I get back the other way? And I said, well, about 5 miles up the road, there's the exit for 28. Just do a U and you get back on. He was a happy camper. I apparently, since it was off the meter, I got a feeling that that money was going to go someplace else other than to the company. Anyways, I walked into the Thruway restaurant and looked over at my mother. Used to be the manager of the snack bar, or the gift shop area. So I walked over there and she wasn't there. I said, well, that's unusual. My mother never takes a day off. So I asked the girl that was behind the counter, I said, hey, where's Bertha? That's my mother's name, by the way, Bertha. We called her Bert. And she said, my God, did you realize she doesn't work here anymore? I said, what? Well, that was the news to me. So I said, oh, well. So anyways, I got into a phone booth. Remember those old phone booths they used to have where you drop a quarter in or a dime in? I think back in 1962 it was a dime or 15 cents. And I called home. She answered the phone and I said, hey, I'm over at the Thruway restaurant looking for you. I got nowhere to get home. Well, naturally my mother jumped in the car and drove over to get me. And I went back home for the Christmas. Now, the whole key part of this Christmas vacation, which I think I had 15 days again, and then I had to report into Pensacola, Florida for a couple of schools. But I had all this money in my pocket. So I got home, and the first thing I did is I went shopping for Christmas. Now, my mother was a music addict. She loved music. I think that is a carryover to my kids, and that skipped my generation because I'm not a music person. Anyways, I went downtown. That's when Amsterdam still had a downtown area. And I bought my mother a stereo set. I paid $146 for that back in 1963. and they were going to deliver it the next day, and that was my Christmas present to my mother, which she kept and to the end of her time. In fact, when she passed, that stereo set was still there in the house. And then the next step is I reacquainted myself with a couple of friends. I called them up and said, hey, let's go out and get a beer. And they were agreeable. They said they'd meet me up at the local bowling alley. I met them up there. I said, what time? And they said, about 6 o'clock. I said, that's great with me. So I get up there at 6 o'clock. Remember, at this time in New York, drinking age is 18. I was 20 years old, so quite legal. So we went up there and I had a couple of beers, and along about 8:30, my friend said, well, we got to work tomorrow, so we got to call it a night. I said, call it a night? Heck, I'm a young 20-year-old sailor who's been overseas for a year and a half, almost 2 years. What do you mean call it a night at 8:30? But as I found out, the world does not stop when you go away. They were doing their thing, and I now is doing my thing. So I ended up going back home. I was back home by 9 o'clock. And that's the extent of my great vacation. Anyways, after 15 days, well, actually before that, I reacquainted myself with an old girlfriend I had. This is the woman that was going to become my wife in 1965, and who I would be married to for 54 years until she passed in 2020. Now, I had known this girl, Maureen. I had known her since I was 12 years old. I was her paper boy, in fact. I used to go walk by her house, and I would throw the paper extra hard against her front door. And then I'd go on and finish peddling the papers for the rest of the street. And it just so happened that when I was walking back down the street on my way home, she would come out to pick up her paper. Just like she had sort of a sixth sense to I was walking by. Yeah, sure. That's probably why I threw that paper a little extra hard to say, hey, I'm here. And I would sit there and talk to her for a half an hour, maybe even more. Anyways, I started talking to her, and we went on a couple of dates, and everything was going pretty smooth. The only trouble is my leave was ending, and I had to fly down to Pensacola, Florida. So I flew down to Pensacola, Florida, checked in, this time as a petty officer. So instead of in a wide open barracks, I got into a 4-man room. And there was only 2 other people in there. There was a second class, another third class, and myself. And you remember how I said when I was in Pensacola, I'd stand in that chow line while all the people would walk by those petty officers? My first day there, I got into that chow line and I said, I got front of the line privileges. And guess who walked up to the front of the line, grabbed their tray, and got fed early? Yes, sir, I took advantage of that benefit of being a petty officer. I went through 2 schools down there, did well at them. And then I got transferred from there. It was time to go overseas. So my next stop was going to turn out to be the island of Guam in the Marianas. You know, I was told that when you get off the plane in Guam, and there's a sign as you come in from the airplane, you come into the terminal, the sign says, Guam is good. I was told that if you take a trip over to Saipan, and you get off the airport there, and you walk in, there's a sign that says, Saipan is better. Anyways, my next video is going to be my 18 months in the island of Guam. I hope you're enjoying hearing my escapades and my story of my life. And I'll be back as soon as I can. If you're enjoying it, give me a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel on YouTube. Have a great day, and thanks for talking.